Hello everyone, my name is Kenneth G. Pieroway from Conception Bay South, Newfoundland and Labrador. This is my very first of 4 YouTube readings for Flanker Press of my latest book called Streetcars of St. John's, and today I'll be reading the synopsis, dedication, and a preface for you. Streetcars of St. John's is a photographic then and now celebration of the former St. John Street Railway. For the first half of the 20th century, the most easterly city in North America had a public transportation system that was on par with those found in Toronto, Chicago, Boston, San Francisco. From 1900 to 1948, the streetcars of the Reid Newfoundland Company, and later Newfoundland Light and Power, traveled on some of the oldest streets to be found anywhere. From the famous cobblestones of Water Street to Duckworth Street, Military Road and Queens Road, and powered by electricity from nearby Petty Harbour, residents could avail of the most modern form of inner-city transport of the day. The reader will take a trip back in time to the St. John's of not quite so long ago, when roads were shared with automobiles, horse and buggies, and the famous trolley cars. From the crossroads in the West End to the shops of Water Street, the steps of the Newfoundland Hotel, and the ice cream parlours of Rawlins Cross, this visual journey around the city is simply breathtaking and bound to rekindle memories for many. For the younger generations, it will be an opportunity for them to see how life used to be and how St. John's looked in their parents' and grandparents' day. The black and white photographs are contrasted with modern-day color retakes by the author of the same scenes as they now exist. When compared side by side, it is fascinating to see just how much St. John's has changed in the last 100 years, and yet in so many ways has remained the same. I dedicated this book to my mom, Anne Pieroway, class of 1937, Memorial University College graduate, teacher, adult educator, film projectionist, caregiver, social worker, mayor, confidant, friend, advocate, activist, trailblazer, and streetcar rider. But most importantly to me, simply just Mom. Thank you for adopting me. Thank you for teaching me to see a larger worldview and to believe in the goodness of people. Thank you for instilling in me a belief that nothing is impossible or beyond our reach, that you can do anything you want if the will and determination is there. This book about your beloved streetcars is proof of that. For everything I am and everything that I've become, I owe it all to you. I remain, always, your loving son, Kenny. And now the preface. Chicago, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver, Boston, New York, San Francisco, and St. John's. What do they have in common? None other than the most modern, efficient, and beloved means of public transport that existed in 1900, the street railway. While today, only Toronto still operates a streetcar network, essentially unchanged in layout and operation, there was a point where St. John's was on par with, and perhaps even exceeded, dozens of other North American cities with inner-city transportation. Not only was St. John's the most easterly city in North America, but it could also boast of having the most easterly street railway on the entire continent. I first learned of the streetcars of St. John's when I was a preteen in the early 1970s. My mom would regale my sister and me with tales of her trips to St. John's in the 1930s and 40s. While studying at Memorial College, the streetcar was the transport of choice, and she was a frequent user. Later, after graduation, and making trips from Haricot to the big city with her young nephew and my cousin Will, no visit was complete without a run around Water Street for the two of them. For the price of a nickel each, they would travel along Water Street, up Duckworth to the Newfoundland Hotel, along Military Road past the Colonial Building, until they would take the sharp left turn at Rawlins Cross and then speed down over Queens Road before turning down Adelaide, back onto Water Street towards the railway station and the crossroads. Of all the stories and tales that she wove about her trips to and her time in St. John's, it was always those involving the little red streetcars that she seemed to recall with the most fondness. These stories stayed with me and were as much a part of my cultural upbringing as a Newfoundlander as were the many other wonderful things I experienced during my childhood in both Collinet and Haricot. I'd already had a deep-seated love of all things train-related, and knowing that the streetcars ran on the same narrow-gauge tracks through town as we from the outports referred to St. John's, only endeared them to me even more. While on our yearly, and if we were lucky, twice yearly trips to St. John's during the 1970s, I often wondered what it would be like to ride along Water Street in one of those little red streetcars with the bells clanging. The 1980s found me enrolled at Memorial University, and during the midterm break in March of 1982, I made my first trip to Toronto. It was there that I saw for the first time in my life an actual operating streetcar off the TTC, and I was struck with the apparent ease of how it effortlessly glided through the middle of Queen Street, with the automobiles having to give it the right of way. Then, in 1986, at the Centre for Newfoundland Studies, I happened upon a book called Narrow Gauge Railways of Canada by Omer Lavalley. This wonderful publication had black and white images of not only the Newfoundland Railway, but also an entire chapter dedicated to the St. John Street Railway Company. For the first time in my life, I could see pictures of Mom's beloved streetcars on Water Street and Military Road and a map of the entire route. After graduation, and with my career in full swing, my wife and I decided to explore Europe with a Eurail pass in 1992, and much to our surprise, discovered that many of the legendary cities there continued to operate a streetcar, or as they refer to it, a tramway. While extending our stay in Graz, Austria, we took the opportunity to explore that beautiful and pristine city, taking our very first tram ride from the outskirts of where we were staying into the centre and marvelling at just how smooth, comfortable and efficient it was. Years later, with a growing family, I returned to Toronto in the fall of 2007 with my youngest son Thomas to watch our beloved Maple Leafs play an original six game against Chicago. He'd asked me to take him on a streetcar ride, and it was there that a kind and generous TTC employee gave us a free return pass to ride on the Spadina Avenue route. Better still, at the end of the route, the car was to return empty to Union Station, but the operator allowed us both to stay on, giving the two of us a private ride to Toronto's famed Kensington Market and Chinatown, thus making a great father-son memory for us to cherish. Rides on the world-famous cable cars and streetcars of San Francisco took place in 2011 and in Amsterdam in 2014. Then in 2016, and quite by accident, I discovered a Bernie streetcar similar to the NLP models preserved at the Henry Ford Museum in Dearborn, Michigan. During the winter of 2018, my wife and I rode a Flexity Outlook, the newest fully accessible streetcar in Toronto, up and down Spadina, along with another run on the Powell Mason cable car line of San Francisco. Amazingly, Omer Lavalley's book, which I discovered as a young university student, and the photographers who contributed to it, became the basis for my first publication, Rails Across the Rock, a then and now celebration of the Newfoundland Railway, in 2013. The success of that book quickly led to a follow-up edition, Rails Around the Rock, in 2014, which celebrated the railway branch lines in our beautiful province. Many of those same photographers had a keen interest in street railways, and some even captured images of the abandoned car bodies when visiting in the 1950s. It was with the support and encouragement of those men that the seed for my third book was planted, and with it, a way to honor the memory of my late mom and all that I learned from her. I truly hope that you enjoy this then and now look at a transportation system that lasted for the first half of the 20th century in the oldest city in North America. You will be amazed at just how much St. John's has changed, from black and white images that are in some cases over 100 years old as compared to their modern day color counterparts, and yet in so many ways has stayed the same. Thank you very much. My next posting when I come back, I will be reading the history of the St. John Street Railway. In the meantime, during these trying times, stay safe, be well, but most of all, be kind.